I think the question. I think the question that was asked was about the Grail in Christian mysticism, and from that point of view, the Grail is you. You are the Grail. So the Grail is a vessel that is hollowed out so as to contain the lifeblood of Christ, and in that sense, through prayer, through fasting, contemplation, various mystical exercises, the idea is that you become the Grail. That every human being is called to become the Grail, to become the vessel through which divinity is poured out into the world. And from that point of view, then, that's where we begin to approach the Grail as revealed to the knights of the Round Table, etc., on their quest. This is the Grail that is revealed, and they see it at different times, but it always withdraws into the distance. They have to keep going. They have to purify themselves. The knights who fall to temptation along the way don't get to see it, whereas Percival, the knight who's considered to be the purest of the pure, he's the one who eventually receives the vision of the Grail. Not even Arthur is good enough to see the vision of it. And again, there was a lot of Christian codification in those legends as well. We read them now just as stories, but they were actually stories of meant to kind of catechize, and there's a lot of theology hidden in them. So the Grail resides in the chapel of the Fisher King, and the Fisher King is effectively Christ, the one who is the fisher of men. So he's the king who is constantly on the point of death but never actually dies, again transcending both life and death, and the one who has the way you find him is to follow his bloody footprints. So again the footprints appear, but also the idea of the wounded feet of Christ. So it's the call to be the knight, to be the warrior, to be someone who's pure, but eventually the only way into the chapel to be able to receive from the Grail, Percival receives communion from the Grail itself, is to give up the sword, to give up the way of violence, to give up the way of fighting. And from an allegorical point of view, the knight discovers that all the way along he has actually been fighting himself. That all of these various beasts and trolls and dragons and monsters and giants are actually parts of himself that have to be given away, so that he can become the Grail, the vessel. Again, it's also an indication of the feminine energies within the divine. So space, emptiness, the idea of, and that's not space to be filled or to be taken over or to be controlled, but it's the idea of divine spaciousness, a spaciousness that is full, an emptiness without absence, the idea of moving into mystery, moving into the place beyond name and beyond concept, to arrive at a place of spiritual union and silence and stillness. So you have this wonderful moment within the Arthurian legends where Percival goes on, but eventually becomes a hermit himself, and his entire life is spent in just the contemplation of the Grail. So yeah, it's a whole map of the spiritual life when we look at it from that point of view. And it begins, of course, that the whole Grail quest begins with the wild man. It begins with Merlin, who's the one who tells them that in order to heal the land, they must seek the Grail. So that the Round Table is constructed, and even Arthur's birth is brought about so that the Grail might be found, so as to bring reconciliation to the broken land or the warring land. And in that sense, it's the idea that only when we become open to the divine mysteries do we actually arrive at a place of peace within ourselves. The land being the torn up mind and heart of every human being. So Merlin steps in as this wonderful instrument of the other, or of the divine, to actually indicate that this is possible, because he himself is considered to be both human and elemental. He's a what do they call it again? A cambion, which is the result of a union between an incubus and a woman. But he was rescued from his demonic father, because the moment he was born, he was baptized. So in that moment, he's baptized by his master Blaise, who is both a priest and a magician, and set on the path of kind of sacred knowledge. And part of that, of course, is his experience of moving into the woodlands to learn the the old powers of shapeshifting and the kind of shamanic initiation, etc., that would be part and parcel of that. So it's in story form an indication of the transformation of the bestial into intellect, and from intellect then into spirit. It's the idea of the land being a sort of a as above, so below idea, that within the microcosm of the human being is written the healing of the macrocosm. And there's also the idea of the us effectively realizing that the only way we receive the Grail is to become the Grail.
John and Nay, we're going to kind of combine their questions because they both mention angels. Nay mentions the three wise men. And we'll just kind of weave this together as the general. So everyone is familiar. I don't know if everyone, but I think most people should be familiar with the nativity scenes that people put out at Christmas. And you have the three wise men, and of course you have Mary and Joseph and the baby Jesus, and often there are angels present as well. Yeah.
What would they like to know about angels?
Yeah, I mean, the question about angels, I think that could be 10 or 15 shows on its own. Yeah. So I think we'll just take it in the form of that Christmas, and particularly the nativity scenes. Like, is the idea that there were literal supernatural beings there, at the birth of Christ?
Yeah, yes, I think that's absolutely true. I think the other thing we need to understand is that the word angel refers to the job that a particular spirit has. It's not the name of the kind of spirit it is.
Oh.
So in Greek, angelos just means messenger. So a spirit who is given a divine message to bring to humankind, that spirit, by virtue of the job, becomes an angel. So the spirits themselves have their own individual eternal divine names that are given to them. And so an archangel, a high angel, is someone who has a very important message. And then we can begin to divide the angels up into the sort of the hierarchy of angels that was known, which is the idea of the 9 choirs. Nothing to do with singing, but the idea of 9 divisions of angels, ranging from the lowest angels, whose jobs are to basically one step above the elemental spirits. They're there for the guidance of the sort of the material universe, etc. So you have angels, then you have archangels, then depending on the hierarchy you choose, to different mystics and saints put it in different ways. But the 9 choirs are effectively angels, archangels, virtues, thrones, principalities, powers, dominions, cherubim and seraphim, going from the bottom to the top. When you reach the seraphim, you're dealing with extraordinary beings whose entire nature is considered to be divine fire and light. So it's love as fire and light, whereas the cherubim are intellect and will. And so all of these kind of powers are present within the sort of the divine presence of angels. So when we begin to talk about them present within the nativity story, I think it's very clear from the scriptures that the scriptures anyway are saying, yes, angels were present and they spoke, and beginning with the Annunciation to Mary through the Archangel Gabriel, who's the messenger par excellence, appears in the Old Testament, the New Testament, etc., whenever there's a very strong divine message to be given. And then moving to the angels who appear to the shepherds and who announce peace and reconciliation. The presence of the angelic orders in the Nativity, though, is very interesting, because in the Old Testament, the angels appear as higher than humankind. They are directing, they are punishing, they are ordering the humankind or the prophets. And even when prophets sort of bow down before the angels, that they are, that's kind of accepted. Whereas from the New Testament on, the angels appear as equals to human beings, different but equal. There's a wonderful moment in the New Testament where the Apostle John tries to bow down to an angel, and he's immediately told, no, stand up. I'm a servant just like you are. So the incarnation is this lovely moment of healing and renewing humankind, so that humankind can stand up and be part once again of this great union of the spiritual world with the physical, the material with the angelic, etc. So in that sense, the angels are considered to be messengers of peace, messengers of reconciliation, and those who sort of guide humankind into closer and closer union with the divine mysteries of the incarnation itself. So, I mean, as you say, we could easily do 15, 20 shows with the angels. We haven't even mentioned the Anaphim, who are angels who appear as wheels or orbs. We could talk about them some other time if you like. But that's certainly where they would figure within the Nativity story anyway.
The sort of, I don't know if it's modern or quasi-modern representation of angels as, robed, winged things.
Yeah.
If you do any sort of digging, you come to, this is a symbol. This is...
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely.
There's a
wonderful...
I'm sorry.
Sorry, go ahead, yeah. No,
that's been known to the laity as a symbol, like say looking at Renaissance paintings, for instance.
Yeah. Oh, I think very much so, and particularly the cute little cherubs and cherubs and putti and all of those kind of artistic figures. That's about as far away from an angel as you can actually get. What you're dealing with, in fact, is a non-corporeal spirit who has the power, should they will, to take on any aspect or manifestation. C.S. Lewis, in his science fiction trilogy, his adult science fiction trilogy, which includes a lot of angels within it, has this wonderful moment when the angels are preparing to meet the new Adam and Eve of a particular planet. And what's interesting in it is that they're trying to decide how they will appear to these people so as not to frighten them. And they go through all the kinds of shapes, the bull heads and eagle faced and, flaming wings and appearing as fire and light and all of those. And eventually they decide on, we'll just appear like they look themselves so they won't be frightened. Mm-hmm. What Lewis goes on to talk about, though, is this idea that the higher up the spiritual hierarchy you go, the more real the being is. And I think this is a really important thing for people dealing with ghosts or spirits or whatever to understand. We see the spirit as insubstantial because it can move through walls, or it fades away, or it disappears. But what Lewis is saying is that actually we are the ones who are insubstantial. And the spirit is actually more real and moves through us as though we would move through fog. And so that's why messages, etc., that come from them can be sort of out of time or not in sync completely, because they're sort of having to really concentrate to appear to us or to tune into us in a more material way, in a kind of a slower way than they are used to operating at. I think it's a fascinating theory, the idea that the only truly real thing that exists in and of itself, in that it does not need anything else in order to exist, is the divine, is God, in God's self. So once we begin to move down into the angelic hierarchies, which are above us in the sense that they are more spiritual than physical, they are far bigger than anything that we have ever encountered, and they have to condense themselves in order to appear to us or to move in us. And he says himself that that's why the angels prefer speaking in our unconscious or in our dreams rather than having to appear, because it's a lot of work to appear to us physically.
That's really interesting. I struggle a lot and I get more into it in Volume 2, where the footprints end, with the idea of, and I think Patrick Harper probably does a much better job in daemonic reality than I do, in addressing the idea that things can be ephemeral in a sense, and but also physical, and
sure.
able to leave footprints in the speaking of Bigfoot, and to leave hair behind, but also be, and it's a very difficult concept, I think, and here I've been writing about it for years, and it's difficult for me to wrap my head around,
Sure. Well, I mean, there's quite a lot of wonderful monuments and places around the world that include, angels having left footprints. The greatest shrine in honor of the Archangel Michael, who would be considered the greatest of the angels, his name Michael means the one who is like God, or who is nearest to God. One of the most important shrines to him is Monte Gargano in Italy, and it's a cave. It's a full cathedral basilica that exists in a cave underground. And the story is that a young shepherd following, I think, sheep or cattle that got lost went into the cave, and this apparition of the archangel took place, and the archangel asked him to have a church built in the cave. And he very reasonably said to the archangel, nobody is going to believe me, and why would anybody build a church in a cave? And so in order to show that he was actually present, the archangel is supposed to have stepped forward and placed his foot onto stone, and lo and behold, the footprint is there to this day, burned into the rock, the rock having kind of melted around his foot. So I think the idea that these beings, if we want to even call them that, can step in and out of our physical reality and have physical impact is something that's present in all of the traditions and all of the faiths all the way back. Whether that's the ghost of your granny who tips you on the shoulder and tells you no, not to cross the road, and saves you from a car accident, or the Archangel Michael, or for that matter, the Buddha or the Blessed Virgin or whoever it might be who appears in these apparitions and has a physical impact. I think we're being told again and again that whether we like it or not, the corporeal and the non-corporeal are two sides of the same coin. One of our old teachers used to say when teaching around this, you yourself are a non-corporeal consciousness affecting corporeal reality just by sitting there, taking up a pencil in your hand and drawing what the image that is present in your mind in that moment. So it's more a matter of scale than a matter of us having to say there is a reality different to our own. It's just where we are on the scale, I think, that makes it difficult for us to understand what's happening around us above and below.
The way I visualize it in Volume 2 of Where the Footprints End is I told people to take a strip of paper and write, spiritual or ethereal, whatever, however you want to write, and physical, write, ethereal, spiritual, whatever, on one side of it.
Sure.
Physical on the other. And then twist it into a Moebius strip.
Oh, right, okay.
And then if you run your finger along as if you were walking on that strip, you'll find you have to walk the entire surface of that, and you will walk across the ethereal and back to the physical before you make the loop again.
Sure.
That's the best way I can explain it, as far as giving someone a model to sort of to work with that.
Yeah. There's a wonderful story. I wish I could remember the book now offhand. I'll try and find it for you. But he was an anthropologist who visited a Tibetan monastery before the Chinese annexation of Tibet. And while he was there doing his studies, he had been invited by the abbot to stay in the monastery and to observe the day-to-day life of the monks. He was doing his kind of work away. But on one occasion, while the monks were in some kind of liturgy or moment of prayer, a drunk man came in through the doors and was making noise and disturbing things. And he wondered how they would deal with it. And he said, by and large, the monks just ignored it and kept going until the man's disruption became so big that it was threatening to kind of disrupt all of the service that was going on. So he said at that point, one elderly monk, detached himself from the crowd, came over to the man and began to chant. And as he chanted, the anthropologist saw clearly a spot of light appear above the monk's head that got bigger and bigger and bigger, and eventually one of the kind of more sort of fierce deities or demons appeared and frightened the drunk man into complete silence, and he ran out. Huh. And he was fascinated seeing this, so he was trying to construct all kinds of theories as to how this could have happened. He said the monk just finished his prayer and went back, and the liturgy went on. Nobody else moved, nobody blinked that this had happened. And afterwards he asked to be received by the abbot. And they were going through his studies, and he said he had to ask the question. So he said, when that happened, he said, I saw this creature, this demon or dragon appear, and he said it frightened the drunk man. And he said the abbot said yes. And he said, well, I've come up with a few theories around it. He said, was it that the chant and the droning was sort of hypnotism, and it hypnotized me into seeing, this kind of hallucination? Or was it, in fact, that the prayer had some sort of ability to call some kind of spirit or being, and we saw that? Or was it, in fact, that there was some sort of a projection that happened from the fears of the drunk man seeing the monk coming towards him? And the abbot smiled and said, yes. And that was it.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the things that we forget about when we're dealing with these things, is that very often it's both and rather than either or. So if for the strange familiar audience, if it's Bigfoot who leaves his footprints and appears to eat food or go through your garbage or whatever it might be, but also disappears and cannot be shot, while people struggle to find reason behind that, I think the older minds and the older traditions, be they Christian or Buddhist or Hindu or Native American or whatever, would have no problem with saying, of course it's real. It's just real in a way that we aren't.
Right.
And I think that's the way we have to deal with these things.
Well, let's move on to the three wise men, and particularly interested in, I think often people wonder why they're called the Three Magi.
Sure. Well, it comes from, the Greek in which the New Testament was originally written. They were referred to as magus or megus, which for the people at the time would have been a very clear indication as to where they came from, that they came from the further east, and were probably part of the Zoroastrian faith, which to this day exists by and large, I think, in modern day Iran, what would have been Persia previously. It's a monotheistic faith. Zoroaster was the prophet who founded it, and not huge to this day in terms of numbers, but it still exists. Probably the most famous Zoroastrian that anybody would know listening in would have been Freddie Mercury, the singer, the head singer of Queen. He was a Zoroastrian and came from a Zoroastrian family. Somewhat persecuted now because of they being a minor religion in a very Islamic world, but they still exist and they're still there. The Magi or Magi were known for the practice of alchemy, the practice of various forms of divination, magic, but above all else astrology. And in those days, astronomy and astrology were one and the same thing. It was they did not divide until very, very much later. And so these three representatives seem to have by what they had observed and by the divination that they had made, they had recognized that whatever was appearing in the heavens was an indication that a prophecy was being fulfilled and a king was being born, and they came to do him homage. They're often referred to as well as the three kings. Now, they're never mentioned in the Gospels as kings. That goes back to a prophecy in the Psalms that says that the kings of Sheba, Seba, and Tarshish will come and will offer their treasures. And so the early Christian writers saw the Magi being the fulfillment of this prophecy. In later medieval tradition, they're seen as three people who come from three different areas. So you'll often see them depicted as a young man, a middle-aged man, and an old man, indicating that we can come to Christ at any age. And that age is no barrier to wisdom, and youth is no barrier to revelation. They'll also often be depicted as an Asian person, a black person, and a white person. And that's supposed to be the indication that, again, the Epiphany is a revelation to all peoples of all places and all times. We actually have an icon here in the monastery that shows one of the Magi as a Celt. So the Irish even got in under the Magi label. But no, they would have been, I suppose, wise people, teachers, traveling magicians as well. I mean, the word magic and magician comes from magus, magi, master. But they would have been seen as masters of esoteric wisdom as well. The gifts they bring are very important because they indicate who Christ is. So one brings gold, which is an indication of royalty, and Jesus' own bloodline through Mary is the Davidic line back to the kings of Israel. They bring frankincense, which is an offering to the divine or to the spiritual world. And they bring myrrh, which was an ointment used to cool the gums of teething babies and to cool the breasts of breastfeeding women when the breasts were inflamed. So it was a very practical thing to bring to a birth. But it was also used to anoint the bodies of the dead. And so it's seen as a prophecy of the tomb, that Christ is born to die in that sense. The names of the Magi appear from apocryphal gospel tradition, so not within the canon itself, but within fairly early traditions as well, as Gaspar, Melchior, and Balthazar. And their bones, the relics of the Magi, can be venerated in Cologne Cathedral in Germany. And it's a huge, big, long story as to how they got there, but that's where they are to this day. The shrine of the Magi is there. And if you want a connection between the Magi and the fairy people or the little people, there's a wonderful connection that most people don't know of, which is in the earliest iconography of the Magi, because they come from the East and they're Zoroasters, they wore what was called the Phrygian cap, which is a pointed hat, but with the point bent down forwards, facing out over the face. And that is the cap that is seen on, very often seen on gnomes, and particularly on the Smurfs. Mm-hmm. So it was considered a cap that was a designation of somebody who was a teacher and someone who knew the mysteries, magical mysteries as well. So in that moment we have the, whether it was a conjunction or a celestial light, the way the star is described, I often think that it's far more orb-like than star-like. It seems to wait for them and move and bring them to the place where they need to go. So I think there's more than just a simple celestial alignment going on. But that's the Magi to this day.
Is there any indication of their lives after the Nativity?
Yeah, there's all kinds of legends and stories that they became. They sort of brought the news of the birth back to their particular places and countries, and that they prepared for the coming of the apostles and disciples, so that they were ready, their people were ready to receive the faith. Now, that's all legendary. We know nothing of, historically, of what happens after they sort of leave the stage and are warned by an angel again to go back a different way, because Herod wants to use them to find out where Jesus is. So again, it's also the idea that this incarnation, this Messiah who's being born, is not being born just for the Jewish people, but is being born for all people. And so even the pagans, in inverted commas, receive the revelation from the very beginning. And that was extremely important for the attitude of Christianity towards the pagan traditions in the beginning as well, because it was felt that if the revelation from the very beginning had already been offered to the pagans, and that these people, without the benefit of the scriptures or the Jewish tradition, were able to find Christ, then it was possible that in their wisdom and in their teachings and in their tradition, the seed of Christ was present. So the early fathers spoke of what they called the logios spermatakoi, which was the seeds of the divine word. And they said that these are present in the hearts of every people, believer and unbeliever alike. And it's wherever a human being intends or looks towards the good, the compassionate, the kind, that these are the seeds planted by the divine word, by the Logos, so as to invite eventual belief and eventual communion. And one of the most important things was not to disturb the seeds. So simply because I want you to be like me, and I think I've got the answers, whoever I am, the warning was always to go very, very gently, lest you crush the seeds that the divine has planted, so that these people will come to the fullness of truth in the fullness of time.
I think that's a beautiful lesson that often gets lost.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah.
Well, since this is our Christmas show...
It's our holiday show, because I think it's fantastic when you are able to interview a monk and they end up talking about solstice and other traditions besides...
That's true.
Whether you celebrate Christmas or solstice or any other holiday, or you wait under the covers watching the British baking show till the sun arrives, whatever your particular persuasion is.
I think that's Sol Invictus, like he was saying. You're just waiting for the return of the sun.
I am.
Yes, our holiday show. I should be more inclusive. You're correct. But this is the time of year that people think about giving, and maybe you can give a gift to yourself and help Strange Familiars at the same time by becoming a patron. You can do that at patreon.com/strangefamiliars. All of our patrons get full extra episodes of Strange Familiars every month. We do exclusive patron episodes. There are over 60 now, and we're adding more every month. As soon as you become a patron, you get access to those 60, and then any new ones we do besides. And you can check out the other levels of support there as well. You can get things like t-shirts and copies of my books and more. Patreon.com/strangefamiliars. I want to thank all of our patrons. We really couldn't do the show without you. You guys make Strange Familiars happen. This time of year, any time of year, we couldn't do it without patrons. So thank you guys. Thanks for everything you do. Thanks for all your help. I also would like to thank Corey N. and his wife for their PayPal donation, Jason W. for his PayPal donation, Mr. RLK from the UK for his PayPal donation, and Eric C. as well for his PayPal donation. Thank you so much for those. They're a great help as well. If you don't like the idea of a subscription like Patreon and you want to make a PayPal donation, like the previously mentioned folks, you can do that at strangefamiliars.com. Look in the show notes under any episode and you'll see a paypal.me link. You can click on that and leave a one-time donation. Everyone can help by sharing the show on social media, liking and subscribing wherever you're listening, whatever podcatcher you use, and leaving us those nice 5-star reviews, which helps get the show in front of new potential listeners. So we'll skip Steve's little questions for us. We'll come back to them, and we'll move to Chad's questions, which are a little deeper here. He says, in what ways can I include St. Francis's teachings into my life? Where's a good place to start?
Wow. Well, if he's looking for reading material or books, I would say, there's huge biographies and very erudite studies of Francis and the early followers. But I would suggest to him there's two books that have stood the test of time. The first is G.K. Chesterton wrote a beautiful biography of St. Francis. It's very Chestertonian, as you would expect. There's lots of puns and wit all the way through, but it's well worth reading. The other is by a more contemporary follower of St. Francis, a friar by the name of Marie Bodo, who wrote a beautiful poetic reflection on the life of Francis and his teachings called The Journey and the Dream. I'd start with the two of those in terms of basic understanding of his life and his teachings. Francis, by the way, is very associated with Christmas because it was St. Francis who began the custom of the Christmas crib, of the manger scene. He began that custom in 1223 in a little town called Greccio, where he set up a life-size cave and brought in an ox and a donkey and had people pose as the various figures so as to make the gospel story come alive again for them. And a very old custom because of that, going right the way back to Francis, was that the straw that was used in the manger was collected up afterwards, and they discovered that any sick animals that lay on the straw or were fed the straw recovered. And to this day, in Ireland anyway, and in many other places, Italy particularly, once the Christmas Mass is over, there is a melee of people who run to the manger scene to get the blessed straw. And some of that is brought back. And the traditions around it are that if you have some of the straw in your purse or in your wallet, it won't be empty for the year ahead. You'll always have enough to support you. The other idea was then that if anybody was sick or any animals were sick on the farm, then some of the straw was kept to be given to them as a remedy. For human beings, the straw was dipped in water and then the water was drunk. For the animals, the straw was just given to them to eat. And some of it was usually kept over the fireplace or over the door, again as a protection against evil. So that goes back to St. Francis. But in terms of his teachings, I think the essential teaching of St. Francis is that if God is the origin of us all, then we are all one family. And that means I am required, when I come into contact with another being, be that human or non-human, to recognize in that a fundamental brotherhood or sisterhood. And so I start always from an equality rather than a dominance. When Francis founded his order, the proper title, the full title of the order, is the Order of Friars Minor, which means the Order of Little Brothers. And that was what he wanted. It was little brothers and little sisters who were there for people in their need. And your very way of life becomes the sermon. Words weren't that important to St. Francis at all. In fact, he recommended preachers to preach a very short word, is his quote on it. And there's a lovely story of him on one occasion saying to one of the brothers, "Come, let's go and preach a sermon today." And they go through the whole day silent, but helping people. And at the end of the day, the brother says, "We never preached." And Francis says, "Our whole day was our sermon." Mm-hmm. So I think there's a lot to that, particularly in a world that is soaked in people, arguing and fighting. To simply be with people in their need is one of the most important elements.
I think one of the most famous, and people may see statues of St. Francis holding birds and
Sure.
the idea of the preaching to the birds, right?
Mm.
Is this viewed as something he literally did, or is this more of a symbolic thing?
100% something he literally did. And the strange familiar listeners are going to be delighted, because the actual translation from the Italian is he preached to the crows, not just to the birds in general. He's often seen these flocks of sparrows and robins and all kinds of birds around him, but he specifically went for the crows to preach to them. And if you go to Assisi and climb the mountain above Assisi to where the Hermitage is, they will show you the stump of the tree on which the crows landed to hear him preach.
Oh, wow.
It's still there to this day. Within the stories of Francis, over and over again, his ability to connect to the natural world in a very supernatural way, it was manifest over and over again. There's legend after legend after legend, and when I say legend, I mean what we call a legenda, which means a written down story by the first followers of his, who were astounded themselves to see everything from insects to falcons to what we would, I suppose, talk about the non-material. Francis would also speak to water, and it would do what he wanted it to do. He would speak to fire, and it would do what he wanted it to do. Towards the end of his life, he was very sick and was going blind. And unfortunately, in the medieval understanding of medicine at the time, because his eyes were weeping constantly, well, that was water. So you fixed water by bringing the element of fire. And a doctor with a hot poker cauterized both his eyes. It didn't do anything for the blindness. But the story as presented by the doctor is that, he was expecting the friars to have to hold Francis down, as they would any patient who was going to have this done. And Francis said to him there was no need to do that as long as he got to speak to the fire first. Huh. So he spoke to the fire and said, "Brother Fire, I've always looked after you and I've always loved you, and you've always been very kind and good to me, and so now in my hour of need, I need you to be good to me once again." And he was cauterized just sitting there with the poker without any pain or without any suffering.
Wow.
So again, I think the contemplative mind, the meditative mind, has a way of dealing with reality in maybe a more unitive way than we are used to dealing with. And I mean, we know this, we've seen this. There are so many people from all traditions who I think when their life is transformed by compassion and by kindness, animals know, children know. We used to say that if you really want to know the heart of someone, see how a child reacts to them, see how an animal reacts to them. they very often let you know very quickly and very directly whether they like someone or not. So there you go.
So Chad continues, and he wants to know some good things to keep in mind in dealing with the other. And I'll add in my own question, or my own second to his question, I suppose. There, lately it's come up often in interviews I've done on other podcasts and stuff, and I've sort of taken to saying now I know some people are just drawn to it, and they will hear me speak about it and hear other people talk about it, and they will have to seek it out. There's going to be no stopping them. They're of a curious nature.
Sure.
But I've taken to saying to people, like, if you can just enjoy the experience through others, through listening to other people's stories, or through reading books or watching documentaries or what have you.
Sure.
That's certainly an easier way to go about it, and I would I would recommend doing that if you are able to do that. But at this point, it's kind of my job. I kind of established it as my job, and so I guess let's maybe talk about some safe ways to approach it and some wise ways to approach it.
I think primarily the first thing I would say is don't let it call you away from your humanity. So in other words, the human things need to be the most important things in your life. And that means relationships, it means family, it means your job, it means your health. And if it begins to affect any of those things, you need to take a step back and a pause. And I think it's really important to have somebody in your life you trust enough, who's grounded enough, whether that's a spouse or a partner or a friend or a teacher or whatever it might be, who's able to tip you on the shoulder and say, you're going there again. You need to step back now. I think that's the first thing. The second thing is you need to preserve totally a sense of humor and accept going into it, you are not going to solve it. I think that's really important. It will always be far, far bigger than any of us. The most we can do is find ways of being with it, I think, that are safe. And that calls for mutual respect. So I think definitely, I mean, you often talk about the rules of folklore and things like that. And they built up over thousands of years so that people would know that there were ways of being respectful and safe. The other thing is, if someone was interested in your life, would you want them, walking into your house and stomping all over your place and taking things that maybe belonged to you just because they were interested in who you are? So I think to accord the level of respect that you would hope would be accorded to you by a stranger or by anybody else. Ask for permission for things. Slow down and be reflective enough to listen for the answers. And if the answers don't come immediately, don't force things. I think it's really important for people to have a prayer or meditative practice themselves that they are solid in. Whatever the tradition is that they belong to or not, but just something that affords them spiritual protection and a groundedness in making sure that they don't surrender their will. I think that's a very important thing. Not to surrender will and not to surrender, let's call it energy, shall we? Most people are happy enough with that as a word. So if you find that you're suddenly sick a lot, or you're feeling drained and tired and exhausted a lot, look at yourself. It might be that you're just overdoing things. I think we need to be very careful of not immediately going to a supernatural explanation for everything. Sure, sometimes a flu is just a flu. But I think it's important to mind ourselves, our bodies, our minds, our hearts. And there are wonderful, we talked about the angels. There are wonderful interactions with wonderful beings who desire only our good and our growth. But it's an ecosystem, as you said last time, and an ecosystem includes predators. And you need to be careful of that. So I think lots of protection. Read the folklore of old. Know the protective practices and prayers and blessings. Don't be afraid to to seek advice and assistance. And the other thing I'd say is to approach it with an intention that's good. And if you are walking out into hopeful interaction with all of this, while being paranoid and fearful, that's what it will sense, and it will know that, and that's what you get back. I think you've got to have a very authentic sense of yourself before you go into participation in this. I'd also warn a little bit about practices that are divinatory or that are invoking spirits or things like that, simply because most people don't have the resources to deal with that kind of stuff. Years ago, I was asked about Ouija boards, for example, and people were saying, they're fantastic and they're one of the simplest ways of dealing with things. And what they forget is that all of these methods are effectively us opening a door into our own consciousness and then waiting for whatever happens to be passing by at the time. If you open your hall door tomorrow and go across the street and sit and watch what happens, you might very well get a lovely good neighbour who comes to you and says, do you know your hall door is open? You need to close it. But you might also, by the time you get back, have nothing left in your house.
Right, yeah.
So I think, we need to be careful about these things, and to presume that we know everything is a very, very dangerous thing. I mean, it's often been said on your program, and I agree with it wholeheartedly, that the moment you think you know, that's the moment the world turns upside down. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, I think that's it. And also a good sense of humor, and just making sure that you have other interests as well as this. If it becomes obsessive, if anything becomes obsessive, it's bad for the human being. And this is just one of those things too.
Absolutely. I will say, as I don't know if I'm a good Catholic boy, that's someone else's judgment to make, but the Hail Mary has served me well in some pretty scary situations. It's just that's my go-to, and it's very centering. And I mean, there was Chad and I do a solstice walk, and we were on the top of a mountain last year. It was 8 degrees, and we started seeing weird lights and started getting kind of a little bit scary, and I just went right there and calmed down.
Sure.
But your mileage may vary. Well, but for me, that's my sort of centering, almost as a mantra. Sure,
and I think the obviously I would 100% approve of the Hail Mary, but I think it's really important for people to know that when whatever way we call out for help arrives. Mm-hmm. The important thing is to call out if need be, and the other thing is if we willingly put ourselves into situations that are definitively dangerous, I think we need to be sort of careful of that too, and that's why all of the traditions have their protective practices, all of them, So, and I think it's very important for people to realize that there's a broadness to these traditions, a commonality in terms of the things that they offer. I saw a very interesting thing some days ago online where somebody was talking about salt and the importance of salt in protective rituals, and somebody responded by asking, well, what about the different kinds of salt then? Like, I mean, does it need to be Himalayan salt? Does it need to be organic salt? Does it need to be purified salt or whatever? And I was thinking of one of our really, really extraordinary individuals in terms of all of this ministry of stuff. He's gone to God now, but in his years when he needed salt, he would just go to the kitchen and pick up the ordinary table salt and take that with him, and off he would go. Because I think once we realize that it's not necessarily the virtue of the thing itself, it's the intention that opens the virtue of the thing. So then it works, and we don't need to get caught up in exact brands or anything else like that. But just to work with it gently, I think, and to make sure that you've got people in your life who are able to tip you on the shoulder and say, enough of that for a while now, you need to do ordinary things,
Yeah, I would add to that, trust your gut a little bit as well. If it's saying leave, maybe it's time to go.
Well, one of the most difficult things at the moment that's out there is people are living such busy lives and such fast lives and such reactive lives that often they don't know how to listen to their gut anymore. And, the mere fact of living very reactive, fast lives means we don't pick up on signals as quickly as we should. And so, unfortunately, people only realize that the dog doesn't want them there when it bites them, because they never listened for the growl. And the growl is there, you'll pick it up very, very quickly if you're aware enough. And so I think where people get very caught up in all of the technology around these kind of things, rather than actually just sitting, being still, being aware, opening their minds to what's around them, noticing the acoustic signals, the smell signals, the gut signals that are there, they'll often guide you far, far better than a lot of the technology that's out there now for all of this.
Absolutely. All right, so let's move on to Steve's list of questions for us, or forced choice. And I don't know if some of these seem like they're meant for me. Some, who knows? But we'll just go through them here. Okay. He says, Bigfoot or Sasquatch? So.
Oh, I'll go Sasquatch.
Okay, yeah. For me, it's Bigfoot. Just I think it's a very. I guess it comes from pop culture, but
sure.
It's, whatever. It's very common, very easy term. Krampus or Saint Nick?
Well, now I'm going to have to go St. Nicholas, haven't I?
I will too. I appreciate the Krampus stories, but he doesn't seem like a real fun guy. Residual or active? I guess he means hauntings with that. I'm not sure. I'll take either one. Well, I guess.
I'll go active. Active is much easier to deal with than residual.
Oh, is it?
Because you can have a conversation.
Can you expand on that a little bit?
Well, if it's active and there's a real presence, then it's possible to actually get information and have a conversation. Residual is often just a mess of cross emotions and emotional states that has all kinds of lesser little entities then jumping on and being part of it.
Oh.
So you end up with a kind of it's the difference between dealing with a sort of a face-to-face conversation rather than a crossed telephone line where you're trying to find out exactly what voice is speaking when.
Very, very interesting. I hadn't even thought about it. Okay, next, Lily Munster or Morticia Addams.
I always loved the Addams family cartoons, so I'll go with the Addams.
Yeah, Morticia was as a very, very young boy. She was my first crush, so I have to go with Morticia.
Oh, there you go.
Ouija or scrying? I think you just laid down some warnings that I would probably equal to both of those. Yeah.
Yeah. The only form of scrying that I think has any kind of merit from a meditative point of view would be the kind of psychomantium, because it's a kind of a more passive experience of just simply sitting and gazing. But again, a lot of the contemplative teachers would say that the idea of having to use tools or apparatus is always dangerous. You're better to try and work with the internal mirror of the soul if possible.
Poltergeist or demon? I don't know who would choose demon, but
oh, I would choose poltergeist, definitely. Yeah. Much easier to deal with. Yeah.
Nightmare Before Christmas or A Christmas Carol? I'll go with A Christmas Carol on that one.
Oh, okay. I'd go with A Christmas Carol as well, I think. Though I love both.
Yeah. Wassail or eggnog?
Neither. I don't drink alcohol.
We go with a non-alcoholic eggnog.
There you go.
Fairies or greys? I'm not sure there's a difference anymore, but
yeah, I think they're one and the same. To be honest, that's a both and. That's a like the Tibetan abbot's response. It's I think it's yes. I think they might. There's certainly very, very close ties and relations. But if I had to meet one on the street and deal with it, I would prefer to deal with one that was appearing as a fairy rather than as a grey.
I think I'd agree. Although my last encounter, where I don't know if you heard me talk about, where they were
I did, yeah.
dressed in weird feathers and dancing around. That was almost amusing. That I'll take. But as far as previous ones, I'd take anything but. I was not very fond of this. Sleep paralysis or out of body? I did not like sleep paralysis when I had it, so out of
body, I would agree completely.
Day hike or night hike? I'll take a day
night hike for me.
I'm sorry, your answer?
I'd go night hike, yeah. Really? I spent many beautiful nights, out in the forests and woods at night, yeah.
I go with day only because my first symptom, I guess I had MS before.
Sure.
But my first symptom of MS, I went blind in my left eye. And very quickly I got a pain around my eye, and then within days I could only see light and dark. And thankfully I had treatment, steroids, and I got 90% or more of my vision back. So it ended up being fine. But one of the lasting effects of that is I have trouble with contrast at night. So it's very difficult for me to see on night hikes. And it makes them... I like to see things. So,
sure.
So it makes them less fun for me than they were. Lute or bagpipes?
Well, I'll be a Celt and I'll go bagpipes, definitely. Yeah.
I love anything with a reedy drone. I like that. Bagpipes or harmoniums or anything like that. I absolutely love them. Solstice or equinox?
Equinox is more powerful than the solstices, believe it or not. But I'd from the significance of them, I would go solstice.
I do enjoy, especially winter solstice. I just absolutely love it. It's just absolutely one of my favorite times of the year. Now, I don't even know if you...
Remind me at the end to tell you something about the solstice. Go on anyway, sorry.
Okay. I don't even know if the Pennsylvania Dutch pot pie are real pot pie with an actual crust, so let me explain.
Okay.
I grew up in Maryland, just 20 miles away from where we are now, and pot pie was different. Pot pie had a crust on it. And I come to Pennsylvania, and somebody says, "Do you want pot pie for dinner?" I said, "Oh, sure, I love pot pie," and they give me a bowl of noodles. And so it actually comes from, what is it? Bot boy? Is that the Pennsylvania Dutch?
Pennsylvania Dutch. It's a German.
Yeah. So it's. I don't know that you would have ever experienced the difference, but I actually prefer, having grown up with pot pie with a crust, I actually prefer the noodle pot pie. But I don't know if you have any. Do they have a pot pie in Ireland?
Well, we certainly have pies and things like that, but I think I wouldn't have the technical knowledge to answer correctly there. But I mean, if it's got pastry, I'm happy. So that's okay.
There you go.
I'll deal with pastry.
Dungeons and Dragons or Magic the Gathering?
Oh, Dungeons and Dragons all the way. Though answering it that way, my youngest brother is also a listener to your podcast. And he is he's very involved in the comic business. He has a comic and sci-fi shop. So Magic the Gathering, I think, has made a lot of money for him over the years in terms of selling all the cards and things like that. But I'm a 70s, 80s kid, so I definitely Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah, I grew up playing Dungeons and Dragons. My mother loved Dungeons and Dragons because she said I had this vast jump in my vocabulary shortly after starting playing that. So she
it's educated a lot of people over the years. Yeah.
And then last is eBay or Etsy.
I think Etsy definitely.
Yeah, Etsy's been good to me this year, so I'll go with Etsy as well. All right, so your solstice story.
Oh, yes. Yeah. So many years ago, I was contacted by a family who they're in what we would call an Irish ascendancy family. So they would have been descended from Protestant landowners who came in during the kind of plantation and put down roots in Ireland. So very, very wealthy family, very well connected politically, all of that kind of stuff. So it was very unusual that they would be in touch with any of us. But anyway, this gentleman was passed on to me because he was expecting his first child to be born. And he was very worried because he was convinced that there was a curse on the family that affected firstborn children down the generations. So I asked him why and where was this story coming from, etc. And he said, well, it was because his great-grandfather had worked for the colonial service in Africa for the British government in the days when they owned as much of the world as they did. And this gentleman had a run-in with a chief of a particular tribe in Nigeria, where he was working at the time. Nigeria or Kenya, I can't remember, it was either Nigeria or Kenya. And this had escalated to the point where the man had broken into one of their sacred enclosures and had stolen two of their images of their deities, and was basically holding them to ransom to try and get the chief to agree to his terms of some particular piece of land management. Anyway, a couple of nights later, the man woke up to discover that his house was now surrounded by a group of men who were chanting and singing and drumming and all of that kind of stuff. And he was told afterward that his family had been cursed until the deities would be returned. So he poo-pooed the whole thing and refused to return them. And when he left Africa to return to Ireland, he took the deities with him, the two statues with him. From the moment they arrived in Ireland, the family had terrible misfortune after misfortune, bad luck. And whenever a son was born to the family, the son was born sick. Not conditions that severely limited their health, but just very sick. So anyway, that had come down the generations to this particular man now. So my question was, the minute I heard it, was, well, where are these statues? And he said, well, we still have them. They're in the house. Wow. And I said, have you ever tried to return them? So he said, no. And I said, well, you're going to have to return them. So he said, well, is there anything we can do before we return them? Because this kid is going to be born any day now. So I said, okay, well, if you bring the statues into us, we'll see what happens. So it was round about the solstice at the time. So I was very aware of this and saying, gosh, we're really, all these conditions are kind of coming together. So I'd only spoken to him by phone at that stage. So he arranged to come to the friary where I was living and to bring the two statues with him. And the friary was kind of hard to find, so I was standing out on the road to be able to direct him in. And while I was standing there, completely empty street, I heard two voices behind me, and they said, hello, both at the same time. And I turned round, and there were two African children standing behind me. And I said, hello, and I was totally surprised, didn't know where they'd come from. And they said, we're lost. And I said, okay. I said, where do you need to go? And they said, we're trying to find the place where we can sing. So I said, okay. Now they were dressed in ordinary, modern, Western clothes. Mm-hmm. It was a beautiful, bright day. There was, traffic going up and down, and I was standing with these two kids. So I said to them, look, I can try and find you a place, but, I was talking about various churches and choirs, and I was telling them about, the centre, and all the while they just stayed very silent, just looking at me. And at the end they said, we're still trying to find the place to sing. So at that moment I heard a car beep its horn, and I turned around, and there was the gentleman arriving in. And I turned back to where the two kids were, and they were gone. So at that stage I said, okay, we're dealing with real stuff here now. This isn't just his imagination or the family story or whatever. There's real things that have happened here. So I went in, and he arrived at this 2-seater sports car with the two statues sitting in the other seat. I'll always remember. Anyway, and brought in the two statues. And the minute he brought them into the friary, I knew immediately that the presences were still with us. They were still with these two statues. So we began the prayer of blessing and prayer and ritual, and I invited the presence of the ancestors of this tribe to be present. And the room was palpably filled. And we had two very ancient, elderly African men just appear. They were there, present in the room. Now, the gentleman who brought them in didn't see them, but he felt that they were there. I saw them. The two of them turned up. So I greeted them, and they greeted me, and they said, the first thing they said to me was, where are we? So I said, you're in a monastery in Ireland. And they said, we need to go home. And I said, yes. And I said, this gentleman gave his name. I said, he's about to make a promise to send you home. And he looked at me all wide-eyed and open-mouthed because he knew what was happening. So I turned around to him and I said, you have to apologize on behalf of your family, and you have to promise you will send these statues back home. So he made the promise and apologized and was overcome with a huge wave of emotion, was absolutely sobbing. And the two presences thanked him and basically just faded out. And we were left with the two statues and him. And I had to get him a very, very strong cup of coffee at that point to try and put him back on his feet and restore him. So I said to him, you've made a promise. You have to fulfill this promise. It'll be far worse for you if you don't fulfill this promise now. So about 2 days later, I got a phone call from him to say that he had gone to the embassy of the particular country and had walked in with these two statues and had said to whoever was at the reception, gave a potted version of the story, did not say he had seen presences or anything else, but said they had to be returned. And, the family were aware that these had been stolen and that they needed to go back. So he was asked to wait, and a little while later, a gentleman appeared on the staff of the embassy who was actually a member of this particular tribe, and thanked him profusely and said, "Do you know what they are?" And he said, "No." He said, "These are the images of the guardian spirits of our tribe." And he said they're very, very powerful and very strong. And he asked him, has your family been okay? And he said, "Well, no, we've had issues and all the rest of it." And he said, "Well, it ends today." And he took them back in, and that was the last he ever saw of them. Wow. Child was born, and child was born fine. But ever since, whenever the solstice has come around, I've always remembered those two little children turning up looking for a place to sing.
Yeah, that's amazing. Chilling.
And, yeah. We're looking. Now, they were very peaceful. Mm-hmm. There was no feeling of animosity or anything. But I was being very clearly told, I think, that what you're about to deal with is real, and to deal with it in a real way.
Wow.
So whenever solstices come around, I'm always aware of it, because in the Celtic tradition, it was believed, the Celtic Christian tradition, it was believed that the solstice was an echo of what they called the 5 great moments of stillness. So they said that the universe became still 5 times throughout its history. The first was the moment of creation itself, when the stars had to be asked to move for the first time. The second time was the moment just before Adam and Eve fell, that all of creation paused to see what were they going to do. Would they give in to the temptation, or would they resist it? And the third moment was the moment of the moment when the angel Gabriel asks Mary, will she be the mother of Christ? The whole of creation stops and pauses at that moment. But the last moment, which comes back to our Christmas, the fourth moment, I should say, the fifth moment is the very end of all time, but the fourth moment in between is the moment when, at the nativity scene, the way the Celtic Christians told the story was that when it came for the moment for Jesus to be born, the midwife, Joseph is looking for a midwife, and he finds this woman on the street, and she says, "Yes, I'm a midwife," and she comes in. And the first thing she does, being a good midwife of that time, is she throws him out. Says, "No, this is women's place and women's place only," and he goes out and goes to the inn to try and get food and drink and things like that. And when he comes out of the inn, he notices that the whole of Bethlehem is completely still, that the birds flying in the sky have stopped dead, that the snow or the rain that's falling is, frozen in time. And it's just for one moment. And at the end of that moment, he hears a child cry. And he realizes the child has been born, and then everything goes back to movement again. And the teaching behind it was that the Christ, or our consciousness of the divine, is born out of stillness. And our awareness of the spiritual world is born out of stillness. And when he goes back, he discovers that the midwife has disappeared. And he asks Mary who the midwife was, and she said, "Surely you recognized her?" And he says, "No, I have no idea who she is." And it turns out that the midwife is Eve, who has been brought through time to witness the fulfillment of the promise made to her all those millennia ago, right, that humanity would be healed by another woman. So it's a wonderful telling, and it's within that Celtic understanding of story and eternity and time and stillness and all of those things. But it always echoes for me that experience as well, that through place and time, these presences were still present and were still reaching out for help and for assistance. That the ancestors are always present with us. So, wow, as we move into a Christmas experience, I'd really hope that all of the people out there, the strange familiar listeners, etc., whatever else happens, that they get a moment of stillness in the midst of it all.
That is a wonderful story. hate to. I just have to ask a couple questions.
Of course. Feel free.
I'm still the host of Strange Familiars. As much as part of me says just let that go and let that be the end of the episode. And
No.
Say Merry Christmas, but the host of Strange Familiars has to say. So these children appeared as just natural, real children. They
about maybe 8 to 10 years of age. The only thing was I didn't see them arrive along a straight street, and I didn't see them go.
Mm-hmm. And the ancestors that appeared, when you doing the prayers, did they appear in modern garb or some sort of?
No, they were in, I suppose, what you'd call kind of traditional clothing. Colorful African kind of robes, I suppose. Yeah, that kind of idea. Yeah.
Wow.
But again, just because they were appearing as that, to me, means they may have just used whatever was in my imagination or mind as what they would look like.
Yeah. Oh, that's just absolutely a wonderful story. And again, this note of sort of cross-cultural participation in the other, and that idea that what is good, as you said at the start of all this.
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. No, I mean this was the experience of that family was a very negative experience, right. But actually what they were dealing with was a very positive, very positive objects. They were about protection, they were about peace, they were about connection with the ancestors. So because they had transgressed against that balance, they had run into difficulty. And again, it speaks to your earlier question around, things I should know when dealing with the other, which is, I think we need to be very careful of, just because we're in a particular cultural mindset or we follow a particular set of beliefs or whatever, that when we walk into somebody else's space, whoever they are, we're walking on, holy ground as such, and we need to be very careful.
Absolutely. Brother Richard, thank you so much. Thank you for coming back.
You're most welcome. Thank you, and thank you for all that you're doing. I think the podcast and the community around it, and occasionally I dip in and out of the Discord and the group and things like that, and on Facebook, and it's marvelous to see people from all traditions and all spaces, not just sharing stories, but working with all of this in the sense of understanding, and there's been some marvelous insights, and I mean I've grown in my appreciation of different elements in different ways, listening to you, listening to the podcast, and listening to the other people who contribute as well. So thank you for the work.
I'm very happy and impressed with there seems to be maybe at some point it'll be a problem, but there has not been a problem with people just being respectful and kind to each other.
Which is lovely.
And that's very, very important to me. If I'm going to have a Discord, if I'm going to have the Facebook group, that's the main thing I want. I want people to be kind to each other and be respectful. And we might not all believe the same thing, but that doesn't mean we can't be, again, just kind and respectful to each other.
Absolutely. And I mean, I think that the more circles in life we have where we meet different thinkers and different people, and in a way that's open and listening, is that's what's going to improve this world more than anything else.
I'm gonna let Allison step in and ask a question.
I was just thinking about a certain specialness about people who die during what was it, during the days between Christmas and
yeah.
Is there an equivalent for people who are born during that time?
Yes, yeah, very much so. It was considered a very special blessing, and that they would probably have qualities that would keep them linked to the other side very easily.
Like our kids.
There you go. Yeah. Yeah, it was always considered a very a kind of a thin place. So people who were born or passed away in that place, would have qualities that would kind of keep them present to both sides.
Wonderful. Well, once again, thank you, Brother Richard, and Merry Christmas to you. And
Merry Christmas to you and to Alison and to the family there.
Absolutely. Keep us all in your prayers, and we will as well, likewise. And
thank you so much, and I look forward to Strange Familiars every week, so thank you for that.
Oh, thank you. So here we have either a little fella or a giant tree.
I think it's a giant tree.
It's a Christmas photo with a well-decorated tree. And is it some kind of dolly or something up front there?
Yeah, it looks like there's almost like a little, like a farm setup or a pen or something.
The equivalent of a Christmas garden or something underneath the tree.
But the tree is so big that the kid is actually standing underneath it.
Yeah, I wonder where, this must be a house with high ceilings.
Yeah.
So I'm going to make a guess at this and you'll tell me why I'm wrong at the date. 1920.
I think it might be ever so slightly earlier than that, but not by a lot.
The teens, probably.
Yeah.
It's a mounted photograph.
Probably someone's first attempt at using maybe a home camera.
Did they sell mounting kits as well?
They did. Yeah, so that's why sometimes you find them loose and then sometimes they're on these gray mounts sort of at the turn of the century. So,
well, it's an appropriately holiday-friendly photograph for our photo of the week. I'll put an image of this in the show notes. You can click on that. It'll take you to our Etsy shop where you can buy this, and some previous photos of the week are still available. Also at Etsy are copies of my books, some of my music, artwork, and more. Etsy shop name is Lost Grave. You can either type in Lost Grave one word, or if you type in Strange Familiars, our stuff will come up as well. Thanks everybody for your support on Etsy. It's where you can get the Strange Familiars Awoken Tree t-shirts as well, with the classic logo. Just added the new art for Where the Footprints End Volume 2 as a t-shirt at TeePublic. So if you go to our TeePublic shop, links for all this stuff is in the show notes. Our shop name at TeePublic is Strange Familiars, though. It's pretty easy to remember. And you will find new designs we're adding all the time. But the most recent one is the Where the Footprints End Volume 2 art. Speaking of, I just got the proof today for Volume 2. I have to read through it. I'm not the fastest reader there is. But once I read through it and approve it, given that there are no egregious errors, it will be approved and may be available just in time for Christmas.
Probably won't get it for Christmas.
Probably won't get it for Christmas, but you may be able to order it in time for Christmas, before Christmas. We'll see.
Oh, that's the other thing I wanted to say. If you're kind of local to the South Central Pennsylvania area, you're running out of time to order for a Christmas gift, all of your books and some of your artwork are at American Daydream.
American Daydream Antiques on Market Street in York. East Market, right?
Yeah. The old Lincoln Highway.
The old Lincoln Highway. Not far from Helm.
Not far from the shoe house. I just like being able to say that because there's not how many opportunities you have to say not far away from the shoe house.
And not terribly far from the secret Site 7.
Which is not the shoe house. Although I've never been.
To the shoe house?
Or Site 7.
You've been to the shoe house.
I've never been to the shoe house.
You've been to it. You've not been in it. Because I've been to it. We drove up to it.
We drove by it. I've never...
We turned around in the parking lot.
Does that count? Like, do you go to an amusement park and turn around in the parking lot and go, wow, we went to the park?
We've been to the shoe... I don't know how much more of the shoe house experience you need.
If that's the case, then think of all the places I've been.
I mean, what more do you do? Do you have to go in and order ice cream to really have experience?
I would like to go in the shoe house at some point.
Well, we'll go in the shoe house.
I would like to maybe.
No one is keeping you from the shoe house. I believe it was closed that day we went. It's not like I drove up and went, look at that shoe house, Allison. Wouldn't you like to go in? Too bad. And gunned it.
Yeah, and said, oh, since we live like not that far from here, there'll never be another chance for you to go to the shoe house. And somehow I've lived decades in this town and I've never gone. Just a quick shout out to the shoe house.
Getting a lot of free advertising. Shoe house.
Should we explain that the shoe house is actually a house-sized shoe that was...
I think old Mother Hubbard lived there.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yes. I want to thank Brother Richard once again for coming on the show. What a wonderful show that was. And again, one of my favorite shows we've done. Absolutely awesome.
I'll tell you what, when people who are not specifically religious are really engaged in a religious conversation or a semi-religious conversation, I find that so fascinating. Like even my mother listened to Brother Richard last year and was fascinated, and it gets to the real essence of the positive aspects of religion, I feel like.
Yeah, absolutely. I would definitely agree. Again, if you'd like to help Brother Richard and his fellow monks with their help of the homeless. It's capuchinDayCenter.ie, CapuchinDayCentre.ie, and the sort of American site is cskdetroit.org.
Those are just brothers in the order that are in another country?
It's the same kind of thing that they're doing in Ireland. They're just, working at...
Is there a possibility he could get moved to Detroit?
I have no clue. I have no clue. If you can spare it, it would be a wonderful thing if our listeners pitched in there. I think that'd be really awesome. We're going to have a giveaway coming up with our friends at Riverbend Comics based on a show we're doing. If you check out riverbendcomics.com, they also carry my books. If you get my books from them, they'll come signed. When you buy books from us or you buy them from John, they will come signed. Our friends Karmic Garden are on Etsy, etsy.com/shop/Karmic Garden. They have the Strange Familiar scent. They have the Flannel Man scent. They've got soaps, scented sanitizers, natural cleaners, candles, beard balm, and more trusted remedies made from Mother Nature. Karmic Garden. Want to wish everybody happy holidays. I think we'll probably be back next week with a show, even though Christmas Eve, I think, falls on Thursday. I think we'll probably still have a show next week, but I wanted to make sure to get the Christmas show out early.
Yeah, it's nice because it's a long episode, too, so if you wanted to break it up, you could break it up.
Absolutely. So thanks for listening, everybody. We should be back next week with another episode. Maybe we'll drop a bonus episode as well in there. We'll see. It depends what we have time to do. Pretty busy time with the new book and everything else, but I would like to give you guys as much content as we can. Thanks for listening. We'll be back soon with another episode of Strange Familiars. Strange Familiars is a production of Dark Holler Arts, music, books, art, podcasts, and more, darkhollerarts.com. Intro and background music is by Stone Breath. Go to stonebreath.bandcamp.com for more. You can also go to stonebreath.com or stonebreath.org. They all go to the same place.
There isn't a stonebreath.edu, is there?
No, there's not. Not yet.
I feel like I've been there.
Not yet. We're on Facebook, facebook.com/Strange Familiars, where you can join the Strange Familiars gathering group. And we're on Instagram @Strange Familiars.
Saviors to be as green as the leaves and as deep as the sea. Well, the holly bears the berry, and what a wondrous sight! And Mary bore Jesus upon Christmas night. Jesus who hung upon a tree, and flowers ever on for you and for me. Well, the holly bears the berry, as green as the grass. Mary bore Jesus who died on the Jesus, our Saviors to be, born in a manger, yet a king was he. Well, the holly the key.